Well, now there's arguably only two things in Rainbow Unicorn Land that irritate me more than Nicola Thinlips. That would be, of course, her right-hand man, Hamza Useless. But even worse yet, Hamza Useless, yet again, trying to justify his hate crime bullshit. Now, I'm a man who does not believe in the concept of hate crime laws to begin with. My idea of a hate crime, as I've said in numerous videos throughout the years, would be targeting somebody, like vandalising their property and whatnot because they're from a certain region or whatever it may be. Not for what appears to be political disagreements, not for offending somebody's namby-pamby feelings. And that is the direction of travel that we have headed in recent times here in Rainbow Unicorn Land, thanks to the SNP. You know, a true bastion of nationalism is what the SNP are, with their consistent pish in relation to social justice and left-wing intersectionality and so-called equality. If you're going to go down the route of hate crime legislation, then theoretically it should be equal. But with all the bollocks that comes from lefties, it never is it? It seems that their obsession with the likes of intersectionality seem to have certain people down the bottom of that totem pole, and they're there for a reason, because the way that I see it, these hate crime laws essentially are to muzzle us, skulls, essentially, and protect all their little groups of oppressed individuals. So with that said, I've come across this. I was planning on taking somewhat of a break for a week or two because I've had enough of this shit, but I just couldn't resist reading through this, and I haven't read through it all yet. I've read a few paragraphs. So we have here from the Press and Journal, Hamza Useless, hate crime bill strikes the right balance between respecting freedom of expression and tackling hate speech. Well, that's remarkable. I wonder how he's going to justify this. Oh, I'm so excited to find out. It says here that the current legislation has evolved over time in a fragmented manner. And this is, of course, actually published by him. He wrote this shit. So the new bill will bring Scotland's hate crime legislation into one statute, making the law easier to understand and more user-friendly. Crucially, the bill also offers greater protection for victims of and groups affected by hate crime. Now, the term hate crime is a rather broad brush these days. You know, they're forever expanding the goalposts. Consistently. It was only about, a year ago, 2 years ago, we had Mary Black crying about being a victim of misogyny, then openly admitting that men receive an equal amount of abuse on social media, but when it's directed specifically at women because of the wording and whatnot, that somehow indicates misogyny. You know, oh god, whatever. Hate crime has real-life consequences. Here comes the anecdotes again from Hamza Useless. To be attacked or targeted simply because of who you are is a frightening experience. But again, no. Quite often we come to find that you can't know what people are thinking. You don't know what people's motivation was behind what they allegedly said or allegedly did. The assumption or the perception is all that seems to account. That's all that seems to count at this point. So if the victim or a bystander perceives an incident, whether that be somebody saying something or somebody physically doing something, if they perceive that action to have been motivated out of hatred and prejudice, well, that constitutes as a so-called hate crime. This is how ludicrous it's becoming. It's not even about what an individual's motivation was. It's purely what the victim or a bystander believes said motivation to be brought about from. I've been in the sharp end of bigoted abuse and know too well the hugely damaging impact it can have. Again, more anecdotal bullshit. You know, nobody's justifying any alleged racist abuse you may have received on Twitter. But again, it's a bit of a difference between being targeted by anonymous Twitter accounts and whatnot and having your life in danger, let's just say. You know, and not just on an individual, but on families and wider community. Victims face both mental and physical harm. More anecdotal bullshit. The latest reports from Police Scotland show that 6,736 hate crimes were recorded. Now this is a clever little wordplay here, as I've made a video on this in the past, but I'll bring up what I covered in said video. On the website hatecrimescotland.org, the following. It says that police will record, right, the incident that you have reported and then carry out an initial investigation to determine whether the incident falls under the legal definition of a crime or breaches any statutes. If it does, it will then be recorded as a crime. The police will then carry out a crime investigation. So, right there and then, we already have the mention of recording twice. They initially will record the incident, they will put the incident down after a report is made. If they then find that there is something that could potentially have breached a statute, so to speak, then it will be recorded again. It then says that this will involve interviewing victims, witnesses and suspects and looking at other sources of evidence such as CCTV, etc. If they believe that they have enough evidence to support a prosecution, they submit a report to the local Procurator Fiscal, who in turn works for the Crown Office, Procurator Fiscal Service, which is the body responsible for prosecuting crime in Scotland. The Procurator Fiscal considers the police report and decides if there is sufficient evidence to proceed. If there is, the Procurator Fiscal will then decide what, if any, action is appropriate to take. Actions range from prosecution to court, direct measures such as warnings, fiscal fines, compensation, etc., etc. But the point being, of course, that this could be thrown out in court, but that does not then remove the recording that the police initially made. The police will record the incident, and then they will be recorded as a crime if they think that there's sufficient evidence. But it could be thrown out in court. So Hamza Yusuf didn't mention convictions, he mentioned recordings. And that's the point. Because it's very easy, especially if you're oppressed in this country, quote unquote oppressed, to phone out the Rainbow Unicorn Police and report an evil white man for something he may or may not have said or done. And it will be recorded as a crime initially. And if there's sufficient evidence for said crime, it will be recorded again. And then of course it will be taken to court. It's great. Within this, police recorded almost 900 common assaults with a hate crime aggravation. Abuse and prejudice have long-lasting effects on victims, and many will live with their scars, emotional or physical, for the rest of their life. I mean, you can overplay it and over-dramatise your bollocks all you fucking want. It's anecdotal. You could hype this up to no end. It still does not justify making certain speech illegal, because that is what it boils down to. Since the introduction of the bill, there has been much debate around freedom of speech, and I wonder why. You know, if it was so clear-cut, then there wouldn't be a debate in relation to freedom of speech. While there is legitimate debate to be had, there's legitimate debate to be had. Freedom of speech should be protected. If you're going to go down this route of creating laws and legislation and whatnot, there should be a law to protect freedom of speech, but there's not. Some criticism has misrepresented what this bill does. Oh, well, let's hear it, Hamza. Let's fucking hear it. Pardon my French. He firmly believes, so it's not the case that the bill is or is not. It's not a fact. It's what Hamza believes. Bear that in mind, yeah. That he believes it strikes the right balance between respecting freedom of speech and tackling hate speech. But the thing is, though, all speech should be considered free speech, unless it's an incitement to violence and whatnot. Not bigotry and hatred, etc., or what you define as bigotry and hatred, because it's one-sided, if you ask me, you know? The general approach taken is based on Laura Brocadale's independent review recommendations, where he was clear that new stirring up of hatred offences would not have the effect of stifling legitimate views or seriously hindering robust debate. Tailed Feature, a Scottish YouTuber, has done a good video on this hate crime bill a couple of months ago. Check his channel out if you've not already. And he goes into some detail about this. They essentially ignored the bulk of Laura Brocadale's suggestions and recommendations. They kind of did their own thing. It's very nice to put them on paper and pretend that you're following his advice. Let me be clear. Oh, he's being clear now. The bill will not prevent people expressing controversial, challenging, or even offensive views, as long as this is not done in a threatening or abusive way that is intended to stir up hatred or likely to stir up hatred. You know, it's funny because how are we supposed to define? It's very vague. How are we supposed to define what constitutes threatening? What constitutes abusive? And second of all, again, it comes back to the age-old adage. How can you know if somebody's intentions, their motivation, was to quote-unquote stir up hatred? It's not very well defined, and I think that's deliberate. Or likely to stir up hatred as well. So you don't even have to stir up quote-unquote hatred. It's just that it has the potential to stir up hatred. This is ludicrous. It's ludicrous, man. I have been on the sharp end of bigot abuse, and I know. Oh, shut up. The bill includes provisions on freedom of expression to provide further clarity that the prohibition on stirring up hatred will not unduly restrict people's rights to express their faith, or to criticise religious beliefs or practices or sexual practices. The bill operates within a context that the stirring up of hatred offences cannot unduly inhibit freedom of expression protections set out in the European Convention of Human Rights. Stirring up hatred can incite people to commit offences against individuals. Can incite people to commit offences against individuals or targeted groups. So we're at a point now where you don't necessarily have to say or do something to somebody for them to then report you because they had their little feelings hurt or whatnot. No. They're now talking about you saying or doing something that could potentially be seen by somebody else who in turn could could act in a manner that could be considered hateful or violent or racist and whatnot. So essentially, a third party is now involved in this. It's ridiculous. They're trying to criminalise certain actions in case it incentivises a third party to say or do something. This is not the Scotland I want. Well, you know what's funny about this, Hamza Useless? It's really funny because your homeland, Pakistan, tell me what sort of laws are there to protect the people in Pakistan? Because as far as I know, Pakistan has got a bit of a bad track record for treating Christians in a rather derogatory manner, to say the least. You know, your parliament's all brown in Pakistan, but you've got a problem with ours being too white. It seems to me that you want certain rules in place because it suits your agenda. Because if this was something that you truly believed every country should embrace, then you'd be advocating for Pakistan to take up these positions themselves, but you fucking don't, do you, dickhead? The bill, if passed, so it will be, will offer greater protection for those who suffer from this kind of behaviour. Alongside this behaviour, it's fucking great. You know, this so-called behaviour that may or may not exist, it may or may not happen, but we're going to put a law in place just to ensure it fucking doesn't. Alongside consolidation of the long-standing stirring up of racial hatred offences, the bill provides for the new stirring up of hatred offences that would apply to all the characteristics listed in the bill. I mean, isn't this sweet? It's riveting stuff. It really is. We have become such a wet rag of a nation, a fucking wet wipe on the global stage, where we have characteristics that are considered protected. All these little groups of individuals that they classify as oppressed. And who's the oppressor, you ask? Oh, well, go figure. So, of course, they've got age, disability, and I mean, who picks or does anything to disable people? I mean, whatever. Sexual orientation, religion, transgender identity, and variations in sex characteristics. You know, it's funny because all these feminists, you know, the TERFs, if they will, they're up in arms about this as well, and rightfully so, because their speech has been stifled in relation to the transgender element of this. The SNP, they're supposed to be a bastion of feminism, shooting themselves in the foot to a fucking degree. The existing racial hatred offence criminalises conduct which includes threatening, abusive, or insulting behaviour. Insulting behaviour! You know, it's oh man, I hate this country sometimes, man. It's the way it's going. I'm gonna calm down. Like, is intended to abusive or insulting behaviour and is intended or likely to stir up hatred. But again, how do you know that's the intention? And I love how we're at a point now where this could potentially, it's likely to stir up hatred from a third party, as I said. This is ridiculous. It really is. This approach is not new. The existing offences of stirring up racial hatred have been enforced in Scotland since 1986. Similar offences have existed since the Race Relations Act. Existing stirring up racial hatred offences were in fact introduced across the UK, including Scotland, by then the UK government in the mid-1980s. In the late 2000s, the then UK government extended the concept of stirring up hatred offences to certain other characteristics in England and Wales. The new stirring up hatred offence for the other characteristics uses a threshold that the conduct must be threatening or abusive and intended to likely stir up hatred. Some actions must either be threatening or abusive before the new stirring up hatred offence can be committed. But again, where it's a very broad brush in relation to what could be considered threatening and or abusive, as we've seen with the whole definition of what a hate crime is supposed to be at this point. And it is not enough for conduct to be threatening or abusive. There must also be an intention that hatred will be stirred up, or it must be likely that the conduct will stir up hatred. Hatred is a very strong emotion. The legislation also includes a defence that the behaviour or communication was, in the particular circumstances, reasonable. I believe that this sets an appropriately high bar before conduct is criminalised. The Scottish Government is committed in principle for a standalone offence on misogynistic harassment to be developed. Nothing for misandry though. Really screams equality, doesn't it? So feminists and all of your policies that are under the surface directed at white men, that's just going to fly under the radar because misandry, we can't have white men playing the misandry card. The same as you shut down the probe in relation to allowing Christians to be protected under hate crime laws. Oh, you shut that one down, but you gave it to Muslims. Can't have white men playing the Christian card. Pretty little pattern appearing here. I am clear that more needs to be done to tackle misogynistic harassment, said the man who's from a religion that treats women like dirt. Great. Fucking great. And Scotland has an opportunity to show real leadership and make clear that this kind of behaviour will no longer be tolerated. What about misandry? What about misandry? Quick to preach about equality. Right. A working group will consider options around this and membership will be decided in due course. As we move ever closer to stage 1 of the parliamentary process, this bill has received support from a number of organisations, including the Equality Network, Victim Support Scotland, Gender. Have you ever seen the woman who is like the poster child for Gender? Look her up. Look at her hair. Sorry. The Humanist Society of Scotland. Oh, what a shock. What a shock. We are determined to do everything it takes to ensure Rainbow Unicorn Land is a place where there is zero tolerance of hate crime, unless it's against white men. This bill will play an important part in realising this. Peace.